It was a regular evening. I came home after a grueling day at work, expecting nothing more than the usual quiet routine. Except, something was off. Rachel wasn't where she usually was. She wasn't in the kitchen, putting together a half-hearted dinner or sprawled out on the couch scrolling through her phone. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she was just in the bedroom, but a nagging feeling gnawed at the back of my mind. The house smelled different. Perfume I didn't recognize. Her perfume. I stood in the hallway for a moment, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just some scent that slipped past me before. I could feel it, it was a red flag. I walked to the bedroom, and that's when I saw it. Her phone was sitting there on the bedside table, the screen lighting up with a text message from a contact I didn't know. I reached for it, hesitation clawing at me, but something in my gut told me I had to know. The message was simple: "Can't wait to see you tonight." And it was signed off with, "I miss you, babe." My heart hammered in my chest. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Rachel came into the room just then, as calm as ever. "What's wrong?" she asked. The same rehearsed, innocent look on her face that she'd worn for the last few months. I didn't need to ask her anything. My fingers flew over the phone, scrolling through the messages. More texts, more lies. She'd been meeting up with someone who had no place in our life. And there I was, her husband, completely in the dark. "Who is this?" I said, voice low and steady. It was a struggle to keep the rage from exploding. Rachel froze. Her face didn't change, but there was a shift in her eyes. The lie, the act, it was slipping. "You're being paranoid, Jake," she said, her voice too calm, too rehearsed. "It's nothing, just a friend. Just a friend." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This doesn't look like just a friend, Rachel." And then I saw it. The subtle change in her posture, the defensive tilt of her chin. I could feel the wall coming up between us. The wall she'd been building for months. I dropped the phone on the bed, anger boiling inside me. I wanted to lash out, but I knew that wasn't going to fix anything. "Who is he?" I demanded. Rachel swallowed. "You don't need to know, Jake. It's nothing. I don't know why you're making a big deal out of this." I wanted to tear the house down, but I stayed frozen. The betrayal, the lies, everything. It all sank in at once. This wasn't some petty mistake. She'd been seeing someone for months, hiding it right under my nose, and I had no idea. "Tell me," I demanded again, my voice breaking this time. Rachel's eyes flashed with anger, her mask slipping for just a second. She stepped closer to me, and I saw that flicker of defiance. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't scared. She was annoyed. Annoyed that I was even questioning her. "I don't have to explain myself to you," she snapped. "You're the one with the problem. You always have been." I felt my chest tighten, suffocating under the weight of her words. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a slap in the face. And she wasn't even sorry for it. It hit me like a freight train. I wanted to grab her, scream at her. But instead, I stood there, paralyzed by the shock. Felt like everything was collapsing around me. This wasn't the life I'd signed up for. This wasn't the woman I thought I knew. Couldn't sleep that night. The shock hadn't worn off. It had only grown. I spent hours tossing and turning, trying to make sense of it all. But nothing made sense. Rachel's lies had built a fortress around the truth, and I couldn't get past it. Then I remembered something. A weird, subtle detail that had slipped past me before. Rachel's behavior had been off for weeks. Distant, cold, always finding excuses. But I was too busy, too focused on my own world to notice. The signs had been there and I'd ignored them. I got up and pulled myself together. I needed answers and I wasn't going to get them by sitting around. The next morning, I confronted her again. Rachel was sitting at the kitchen table, casually sipping her coffee, pretending like everything was normal. But I wasn't playing along. "I know about him, Rachel," I said, my voice calm but with a dangerous edge. She didn't flinch, didn't even look up from her coffee. "Jake, you're losing it," she said, her voice flat. "Who is he?" I repeated. She didn't answer, and that was enough. She couldn't hide it anymore. I was done. But I wasn't about to let her get away with this, no, not this time. Rachel's silence was deafening. I stood there, staring at her, waiting for some form of response. Anything to confirm that the woman I had married was still in there somewhere. But there was nothing. Her eyes remained cold, distant. The same look she had been giving me for weeks now. It was like she had already checked out, emotionally long before I ever realized what was happening. "You're not even going to apologize?" I finally asked, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. "You're not going to explain yourself?" Her lips curled into a smirk, and for a split second, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The arrogance. She had no remorse, no guilt. It was like this was all a game to her. "I don't owe you an explanation, Jake," Rachel said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Maybe if you hadn't been so blind, you would have seen it coming. But you're too busy with your little job, aren't you?" She stood up, smoothing out her blouse like she was preparing to leave. "I don't need this, okay? I don't need your pathetic accusations. It's over. Deal with it." "Over," I repeated, my fists clenching at my sides. "You're just going to walk away from this? After everything we've been through?" I could feel my anger rising, bubbling up from deep inside, but I fought it back. I didn't want to lose control. I couldn't let her see how much she had broken me, how much her betrayal had shattered everything I thought I knew about love and trust. Rachel turned to leave the room, and for a brief moment, I just stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do next. I wanted to stop her, to yell, to make her feel some of the pain she had caused. But before I could move, the doorbell rang. I didn't expect anyone. The only people who came by unannounced were the neighbors, and they had no reason to be here. My heart skipped a beat as I opened the door, but the sight in front of me was not what I expected. 3 men stood there, their faces hidden behind dark sunglasses, their hands clenched into fists at their sides. The leader, a tall and bulky guy with a scar running across his cheek, stepped forward. "Is this Jake Thompson?" he asked, his voice low and menacing. "Yeah," I said, confused. "Who the hell are you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he nodded to the other 2 men who moved quickly, pushing me back into the house. I didn't have time to react. They grabbed my arms, shoving me toward the kitchen. My head slammed into the doorframe, and a burst of pain shot through my skull. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, struggling against them. But their grip was ironclad. The leader, the man with the scar, watched me with a cold smirk. "We know what you did, Thompson," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable threat. "You've been getting too close to the truth about your wife." "Rachel," I asked, my mind racing. What the hell was happening? "She's not just your wife, man," the scarred man chuckled darkly. "She's been busy with a lot of things behind your back. We've got all the details. And now we've come to collect." I tried to fight back, but they tied my wrists to a chair, securing me tightly with rope. I couldn't move. I couldn't escape. I felt the anger building again, but it was mixed with a deep, hollow fear. What the hell did they want from me? "Listen," I said through gritted teeth, trying to calm my breathing. "I don't know who you think you are, but I'm not the one you should be after. It's her. Rachel is the one you're looking for. I don't even know what's going on here." The scarred man crouched down in front of me, his eyes locking with mine. "We're not here for her," he said, his voice turning colder. "We're here because of you." I didn't understand. "Me? What the hell do you want with me?" The man's grin widened. "We could have a threesome with your cheating wife right now, but that would be boring and uninteresting," he said, laughing softly to himself. "So we're giving you something better. We'll let you go. You've got 1 hour. After that, we come after you. The game is simple. Whoever kills you first will be the first to possess your wife. Think of it like a little prize." I was stunned into silence. My mind was spinning. What kind of sick game was this? The leader stood up, turning to his men. "Let's go. He's got an hour's head start. Don't let him think he can get away." He looked at me one last time, his eyes dark and cruel. "But remember, we'll find you. We'll always find you." Before I could react, they left, leaving me tied to the chair. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I couldn't catch my breath. My mind was racing. This was a nightmare. These men, whoever they were giving me an hour to escape, to survive. But I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let Rachel's betrayal define me. I was a former Marine. I knew how to fight. I knew how to survive. And I wasn't going to let these bastards, or her, take everything from me. I could feel the rope digging into my wrists, the tension in the air almost suffocating. The door slammed shut behind the men, their voices fading away, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and the rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. My mind was reeling. I had just been given an hour to survive, an hour to fight, to escape, or to die. The game was set and I was the prize. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to play by their rules. I wasn't sure what Rachel was involved in, how deep her lies ran, or what kind of people she had gotten mixed up with. But one thing was certain. I wasn't about to let her drag me down with her. The betrayal had already burned through my heart. Now it was time to burn everything else to the ground. I shook the ropes binding my hands, testing their strength. They were tight, but not tight enough. My mind raced back to the training I had gone through as a Marine. I had been taught to survive in worse conditions, to think, act, and adapt under pressure. The rope wasn't going to hold me forever. I gritted my teeth, using the edge of the chair to leverage my body, rubbing the ropes against the rough wood. The pain in my wrists was sharp, but the thought of those men, of them coming after me, hunting me down and claiming Rachel, kept me focused. I had 1 hour. 1 hour to get out of here and do whatever it took to protect myself. The ropes finally began to fray. I could feel the fibers weakening, the tension in my arms building as I twisted harder. Felt like forever. But then, finally, with a snap, the ropes gave way. My hands were free. I stood, stumbling a bit as the blood returned to my wrists. The room was still spinning with the remnants of the encounter, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, urging me to move, to do something. But where to go? Rachel. I needed to find her. I needed to confront her, to get answers. Answers I might not want, but answers I deserved. She'd been a part of this. She had to be. It wasn't just a mistake. It was calculated. She had set this whole thing in motion, and now she was nowhere to be found. I ran through the house, checking every room. The kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, no sign of her. It didn't make sense. Where could she have gone? And why hadn't she been more worried about what was happening? Was she involved in this twisted game, or had she simply watched me get caught in their trap? I found my phone, but there was no signal. Of course, they knew exactly how to isolate me. No contact, no help. Just me, alone, with an hour to figure out what the hell was going on. I tried to calm myself, focusing on the basics. I couldn't afford to panic. I needed a plan. I needed to get the upper hand, and I needed to do it fast. Those men, whatever they were, had a head start on me, but I wasn't about to let them win. I wasn't some helpless victim waiting to be hunted. No, I had fought in worse conditions, and I would fight again. But this time, the fight wasn't just for survival. It was for my dignity, for my pride, for the truth. My mind began to work in overdrive. The men had left. They'd given me an hour to escape, but why? Were they testing me? Or were they trying to make sure I ran? It didn't matter. They thought they had all the control, but I wasn't going to let them. I grabbed a crowbar from the garage, anything I could use to defend myself. I knew how to handle myself in a fight, but I wasn't going to rely on just brute force. I needed to be smarter than them. I needed to get ahead of the game. I moved swiftly, making my way through the woods behind the house. The trees felt like a blanket, shrouding me in the darkness of the night. I could hear the rustling of leaves, the crack of a twig underfoot. My senses were heightened. The fear that gripped me earlier had been replaced with something else. Determination. I couldn't let them track me. I had to stay ahead. The house was still in sight, but I wasn't going back there. I needed a plan to outsmart these men, to get the upper hand. But first, I needed to know where Rachel was. Had she planned all of this? Was she just using me as a pawn? Or had she gotten caught in this mess herself? I needed to find her, and I needed to confront her. I didn't care about the lies anymore. I didn't care about the broken promises or the years we'd spent building this life. I wanted the truth, and I wanted to make her answer for what she'd done. I moved through the woods for what felt like hours, searching for a way to turn the tables. But the silence around me was unnerving. No one was following me, not yet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, though. Every shadow, every rustling sound, sent my heart racing. Finally, I found the edge of the woods, the familiar outline of the neighborhood in the distance. I paused, catching my breath, trying to get my bearings. But then, a sudden noise from behind made my heart skip a beat. I spun around, the crowbar raised, but there was nothing there, just the wind. I took a step forward, trying to shake the creeping dread. Then I heard it again, a faint sound, almost too quiet to notice. The unmistakable crunch of leaves underfoot. Someone was out there. I wasn't alone anymore. The wind rustled through the trees, and I stopped dead in my tracks. The sound of the leaves crunching underfoot had been unmistakable. My pulse thundered in my ears as I strained my senses. Whoever was behind me wasn't trying to hide. They were letting me know they were there, playing with me, taunting me. I tightened my grip on the crowbar, my knuckles white. My mind raced through the possibilities. They could be circling, waiting for me to make a mistake. I couldn't let them surround me. I needed to stay in control, keep moving. I couldn't afford to freeze. I glanced back, scanning the dimly lit woods. Nothing. There was no one there, but I could feel the weight of eyes on me. I'd been trained to remain calm in situations like this, to stay focused. But now, the fear was creeping in, spreading through my veins like poison. I moved cautiously, taking slow, deliberate steps. My senses were on high alert. I had to trust myself. I wasn't some helpless victim. I wasn't going to let them catch me off guard. The crunch of leaves came again, closer this time. I spun around, but again, there was nothing. My mind was playing tricks on me. Or was it? Then, a shadow moved in the distance, darting behind a tree. I caught a glimpse of it, just enough to see the outline of a figure. I cursed under my breath and broke into a sprint, my heart hammering as the cold night air whipped around me. Every muscle in my body screamed as I pushed myself harder, faster. I had to make it out of the woods. I had to make it to safety before they got close. The sound of footsteps behind me grew louder, and I knew they were gaining on me. My instincts kicked in, and I veered off the trail, cutting through the thick underbrush. Branches whipped against my skin, leaving scratches that stung like fire. But I didn't stop. Couldn't. I emerged from the trees and into an open field, the faint glow of streetlights casting shadows across the grass. My breath came in sharp gasps, and I forced myself to keep moving. But I wasn't out of the woods yet. From behind, I heard the unmistakable sound of shouting. "We see you, Thompson," one of the men yelled. "You can run, but you can't hide." I glanced over my shoulder. The three men had broken from the woods and were now charging after me, their figures silhouetted against the night sky. They were fast, determined. I could see the fire in their eyes, the hunger for whatever twisted prize they thought they would win. I sprinted toward the nearby road, knowing I had to keep ahead of them. My mind was running a mile a minute, trying to think of an escape plan. There were no cars around, no one to help. This was my fight, and I wasn't about to lose. The leader of the group, Scar, was the fastest. He closed the distance between us in a few seconds, and I could hear his footsteps pounding on the ground as he gained ground. I swerved, trying to outpace him, but the night air felt thick and heavy, and I was starting to tire. The fatigue was catching up with me, but I couldn't slow down, couldn't let them win. "Come on, Thompson," Scar taunted. "You're making this too easy. We're gonna catch you sooner or later. It's only a matter of time." My mind flickered back to Rachel, to the betrayal, to her cold, distant face as she looked me in the eyes and walked away. Was she even worth saving anymore? What had she gotten herself into? But I pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about survival, about taking control of my life again. I spotted a small building in the distance, a rundown gas station with a single light flickering above the door. It was my only chance. If I could get there, maybe I could find something to defend myself with. Maybe I could turn the tables. I pushed myself harder. Every step a battle. Every breath a struggle. Scar was right behind me, and I could feel the heat of his pursuit. He was closing in fast. I reached the door of the gas station and threw it open, slamming it shut behind me. My chest heaved as I pressed my back against the door, listening for the sound of footsteps. I tried to steady my breathing, straining to hear anything that might give me an advantage. The place was empty, abandoned, with dusty shelves and old newspapers scattered across the floor. It smelled like stale oil and cigarettes. I took a few steps further into the building, my eyes scanning for anything that could be used as a weapon. My mind raced, analyzing the situation. I was out of options. The men weren't far behind, and I knew it wouldn't take them long to find me. I had no choice but to make my stand here. I found a wrench lying on the counter, rusty, but heavy enough to do some damage. I grabbed it, gripping it tightly in my hand as I waited. The door creaked open, and I heard Scar's voice, low and mocking. "You think this is going to save you, Thompson? You think this is where you make your stand?" I heard the other two men entering behind him. They were right on top of me. I stepped out from my hiding place, wrench in hand, ready to fight. "Let's see how well you fight." Then, I spat, my voice shaking with anger. Scar smirked as he stepped closer, his hand reaching for something in his jacket. "I don't think you have the stomach for it," he said, his voice almost a growl. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted inside me. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let Rachel's betrayal control me any longer. The fight was on. The wrench felt heavy in my hand, but it wasn't the weight of the metal that weighed on me. It was the realization of what I was about to do. I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I wasn't even trying to escape. This had become something else entirely. A final confrontation. A test of survival, of strength, and of what I had left in me after everything had fallen apart. Scar smirked, that arrogant grin twisting his face like a wolf circling its prey. "You really think you can fight us all off, Thompson?" he sneered. His voice was slow, deliberate. He knew he had the advantage. He had the numbers, the intimidation, and the confidence of a man who'd done this before. But I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of watching me crumble. I raised the wrench, holding it firmly, trying to steady my breath. My heart was pounding in my chest like a drumbeat. Every sound in the gas station amplified in the tension that crackled in the air. The other two men were closing in slowly, their footsteps heavy on the creaky wooden floors. They didn't need to rush. They knew that fear would be my undoing. But they underestimated one thing: anger. I wasn't afraid. I was furious. At Rachel, for everything she had done to me. At these men, for treating me like a game. At myself, for ever allowing this to happen. This was it. The final showdown. "You know," Scar continued, his eyes glinting with something dangerous, "we could have made this easier for you, but you've made it personal. Now it's just fun." He stepped closer, his hand reaching into his jacket, pulling out a knife. A flick of the wrist, and the blade caught the dim light, gleaming like a promise of pain. I swallowed hard, gripping the wrench tighter. I wasn't going to let him come near me. "You want to test me, huh?" I spat, my voice low and steady, despite the adrenaline rushing through my veins. "Let's see how you handle it." I lunged at him, swinging the wrench with all the force I could muster. The metal clanged against his arm as he blocked it, grunting in pain. For a moment, he seemed surprised, probably not used to someone fighting back like this. But then he recovered quickly, his smile returning, a sickeningly confident grin. "You're gonna regret that," he said. He took a step back, raising the knife as if he was preparing for a strike. I didn't hesitate. I darted toward him again, but this time, I feinted to the left, using my momentum to swing the wrench at his side. The impact was solid, and he staggered, cursing under his breath. The knife dropped from his hand as he cursed again, clutching his side. Now was my chance. I swung the wrench again, aiming for his head, but just as I did, one of the other men, Jared, I remembered his name, rushed forward, tackling me from behind. We both hit the floor hard. The breath knocked from my lungs. I struggled to get up, but Jared's weight was on top of me, his hands gripping my throat. "You're not gonna win," he hissed, his hot breath on my face. "This is over." I fought against him, pushing against his chest, trying to break free. His grip on my throat tightened, and the world began to dim around the edges. But I refused to go out like this. I wasn't going to die here. With every ounce of strength I had left, I slammed the wrench into his face, hearing the sickening thud of bone cracking under the force. He screamed in pain, but his grip didn't loosen. I struck again, and this time I connected with his jaw. He released me, and I shoved him off, gasping for air, my vision blurry. Blood dripped from my nose, my hands shaking from the exertion. But I wasn't finished yet. I pushed myself to my feet, ignoring the dizziness in my head. Scar was still down, clutching his side, but the third man, David, was coming at me. He was fast and he was angry, but I was faster. I ducked as he swung at me, the knife narrowly missing my shoulder. I twisted, slamming my fist into his ribs. He grunted, stumbling back, but he recovered quickly, his eyes wide with fury. "Not so easy, huh?" I said, my voice hoarse. He sneered at me, his expression darkening. "You think you're the first guy we've dealt with? You're nothing. You're just a sad, broken man." But that was the thing. He was wrong. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't the man who had been cheated on, the man who had let his wife's betrayal cut him down. I was stronger than that, stronger than any of them. I swung the wrench one last time, this time aiming for David's knee. He cried out in pain as he collapsed, clutching his leg. He didn't have the strength to stand anymore. I turned to Scar, who was still on the ground, his breathing ragged. He was defeated, his knife forgotten at his side. He was no longer the predator. He was just another man who had underestimated me. But before I could approach him, I heard the familiar sound of a car engine, the roar of an engine in the distance, the headlights cutting through the darkness. My heart skipped a beat. The sirens followed, the sound of approaching help. I froze. For a moment I was relieved. Then reality hit me again, and I realized who it was. The cavalry wasn't here to save me. It was Rachel. Her car screeched to a halt outside the gas station, and she stepped out, her eyes wide with fear. Her hair was disheveled, her clothes wrinkled from what I could only imagine were hours of running from whatever had gone down. "Tommy!" she yelled, her voice breaking. "Tommy, you have to listen to me." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear her lies, her excuses. The woman I had loved, no, the woman who had betrayed me, was standing right in front of me. But she was no longer the woman I wanted to save. I looked at her coldly, my hand tightening around the wrench. "Get in the car, Rachel," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "I'm done." Rachel stood there, her hand gripping the door of the car as if it were her lifeline. Her wide eyes darted between me and the men on the ground. The moment she stepped out of that car, I could see it. The desperation in her expression, the pleading in her eyes. She wasn't here to help me. She was here to save herself. "Tommy, please," her voice cracked, and for a split second, I almost believed her. Almost. But then the fog in my mind cleared, and I remembered everything. I remembered how she'd looked me in the eye as if nothing had changed, how she'd lied to me, how she'd shattered every ounce of trust one had in her. Her face contorted with guilt, and she stepped forward, slowly, as if she thought I might still be the man I was before all of this. But I wasn't. I was different now, broken, yes, but stronger than I had been before. "Rachel?" I said, my voice cold, sharper than it had ever been. "I don't care anymore."